There are two widows. One is an Israelite. Her name is Naomi, and she has a grievance against God. Her grievance is that when her husband took her to Moab, he died and her two sons died, leaving her and her two daughters-in-law widows. And she says to the women of Bethlehem when she arrives back there, "Don't call me pleasant Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, bitter." The other widow is Ruth, a Moabite. She is from a nation that is under God's curse. There is a degree of wickedness in Moab, and has been for hundreds of years, that the Lord rolled Moab's curse against Israel back on Moab and said, "You will be excluded from Israel to the 10th generation." So here is this interracial family now, a fragmented family, two widows, a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, an Israelite and a Moabite, back in Moab. And the question that has been hanging over this story is whether this Moabite woman will be received in Bethlehem. Will she be acknowledged? Will she be shunned? Will she be shamed or treated even worse because she is an enemy of Israel? Or maybe put the question a little bit differently. Are the people of God going to camp on a convenient part of the law that would allow them to exclude this woman and to judge Naomi for what her husband did, and basically to say, well, this is on your heads, this disaster, and so, Mara, I guess it's your fault, and Ruth, you'll have to fend for yourself, but we're not going to be part of this. They might have grounds for saying that. And the question is, will the people of Bethlehem, will the people of God do this to Ruth and to Naomi, but especially to Ruth? And we started to see the answer last week. The answer comes in the person of this new character, Boaz. Boaz is a strong man. He's called a valiant man. He is a man of means. He is in a central leadership position in his community. And what we have found is that Boaz is running an operation in harvest time, not just to bring in the harvest, but also to build up the community, to care for the community. And so as his harvesters and his gleaners are out there in his fields, he is obeying all the law of God, not just part of it. He is obeying the laws of God, and that we looked at last week, Leviticus 19. Don't harvest your fields all the way to the edge. Leave some for the poor. Let the poor come in behind your harvesters and reap what they need from your fields. And Boaz has set up a whole operation where this happens. And as he comes out into his field and he greets his harvesters and his managers, he says, "The Lord be with you," because the Lord is there in that field. And Boaz believes this. And those workers are trained. They have been discipled, if you will, by Boaz. And he has taught them what it means that the Lord is in that field. And when he says, "The Lord be with you," they return the blessing. And the Lord bless you. What has Boaz done here? He's created a business operation where the name of the Lord is on it, the presence of the Lord is acknowledged in it, and the blessing of the Lord is upon every person in that field. The dignity of every person in that field is being respected. And Boaz has also heard about Ruth. We saw last time that he comes out into his field and he comes up to his manager and says, "Who is that young woman? Who does she belong to? Who is her family?" And his manager is ready. He knows that Boaz cares about everyone in his field, including the poor women who are gleaning in the field. And knowing this, the manager inquires, he's got the information, and he's ready with an answer. He says, that is Ruth, the Moabite woman from Moab, the man emphasizes. And he says, she's been in this field ever since we started, and she has been gleaning all day long without a rest, or except for a short rest. And so she's working right along with all the rest of us. And so he gives that commendation. And that's where we left off last week. And what we've seen here is that Boaz is not just interested in helping one person. He has set up a whole operation to help many people, to make many needy people part of the harvest time in the community, to give them a place to be producers along with the rest of the community and to work alongside the community. So he has also created a place where they have dignity and the women have protection. And so he has created a space here where the women who are working in that field are not going to be harassed, they're not going to be assaulted, and this is a very important part of the story of Ruth. So when we pick this story up, part of our question is already answered. Ruth is allowed in this field. Boaz, a man of the law of God, who thinks through the law of God, has decided that in Ruth's case, she has come out from under the curse of Moab, and she belongs in his field, and he is going to love her, according to Leviticus 19. He's going to love her as he would love himself. So that's the story up to this point. The question is, why? Is Boaz just saying, curses from God, it happens all the time. We don't really pay attention to those. We don't like those parts of the law, so we just skip them and we don't apply them to our situation. No, that's not what's happening here. He is going to tell us today why he reached the conclusion that Ruth, the Moabite woman, under a curse, is from under that curse. How did he reach that conclusion? So we pick it up at verse 8 here, when he speaks directly to Ruth. Then Boaz said to Ruth, verse 8, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." This gives us more insight into what Boaz is thinking about this situation. Number one, he's thinking the law says to do this, to provide for the poor by leaving some of the field open to them. So I'm going to do that, but the law is also saying, love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19:18. So I'm going to do that too. I'm going to do that and extend it to the young women who are in this field. I'm going to make sure that they are not assaulted. And we've talked about the fact in previous sermons that this is a very real danger. Israel is a dangerous place. It is a lawless place. And women can be assaulted at will and are assaulted all the time in this period of the Judges. And so Boaz, knowing this, says, basically, not in my field. It will not happen here. I will protect those who are vulnerable, and I will instruct and train the young men so that they do not behave in this way, or they're out of my field. So there's this strong resolution to go further than what the letter of the law says. And basically to embrace this command, love your neighbor as yourself. And Boaz is saying, I'm going to do all of that. I am going to love my neighbors as much as I love myself. So he has created a whole operation here to do this. He's also going beyond the letter of the law by saying to Ruth, "Stay here." Not only will I ensure that you are protected from assault, but I'm also going to want you to stick with my young women here in this field and don't go to any other field because of the danger that you might be assaulted there. So I want you back here tomorrow. I want you back here the day after that, all the way through harvest. Work in my field. It is open to you. You will be safe here, and I personally am guaranteeing that. All of this is included in the law. Love your neighbor as yourself. But it's not spelled out in the law. And this is telling me here something very important about Boaz's character. Boaz understands the law of God deeply. He understands that the law is about not just spelling out what you should do and what you shouldn't do, but it's about why you should do these things. And Boaz is a deep believer in why the law should defend the vulnerable and the poor, and why Israel should organize itself to accomplish this. So that's part of what happens here. I just want you to think about this from Ruth's point of view. If you get called over to the boss in the field, and you're the foreigner, not just a foreigner, but you're the Moabite woman, and the boss shows up in the field, you know the boss only cares about one thing: get the crop in. Get it in the storehouses. Get this stuff threshed. It's not safe for us to leave it out there. Everybody, all hands, while there is light all day long, get the crop in. And that's all we care about, because that's our security. And so if you're called over to that boss when he shows up in the field, I imagine you have some expectations. If you're a Moabite woman, this is it. I'm going to get kicked out of this field. He found out who I am, and he is done with me, and this is over. And they may not even let me take any food off this field. They may take that from me. Even all of the work that I've done is probably gone today. Maybe she's having that kind of trepidation as she walks over to the boss. And instead, the boss says, "You're not only in my field and part of my crew, but I'm going to protect you in particular. And I want you to stay here and come back and come back and come back." Total reversal of what she had every reason to expect. And so the boss says all of these things that are literally too good to be true. And so Ruth in verse 10 fell on her face, bowing to the ground. So when she hears these words, it's so powerful, and Boaz's goodness is so striking to her that she falls down as if he's a king and bows before him, calls him my Lord. "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Notice this. Those words, take notice. What is she saying? You're looking at what I am going through, and you're seeing my presence here, not from your point of view, but from my point of view. And you're noticing and acknowledging and recognizing me. Why? Why are you doing this? I am a foreigner, she calls herself. And this is when this conversation starts to get even more interesting. Look with me at Boaz's answer in verse 11. And I just want you to know about two words here. But Boaz answered her, Hugad, Hugad. Two words that are in fact the same word, nagad, reported. And what he says to her at the start of this sentence is, the report has been reported to me. And why would he do this? Hebrew is a very simple language. There aren't very many words in its vocabulary, and it's a very cut and dried language. It's like there's a word and there's a thing, and there's not a lot of room for abstraction or anything like that. So if you want to emphasize something, you say it twice. If you really want to blow somebody's mind, you say the same thing 3 times, like holy, holy, holy. 3 times, it's like mind-blowing. It's infinite holiness. But what he's saying here is, Hugad, Hugad. The report has been reported to me. It is fully known. Sister, I got the whole story. All of a sudden, this thing opens up and becomes something completely different than just Boaz caring for Ruth. Boaz, he's an owner, operator. He's a man of systems. And he has built his system to observe the law of God, love your neighbor. But now we're realizing that he is at the center of something larger. He is now a community leader where there are at least some leaders in Bethlehem who gather together and who say, did you know that Naomi came back today? 10 years later, she's back, and her daughter-in-law is a Moabite. And that Moabite daughter-in-law has stuck with Naomi in friendship through widowhood. They have nothing. And so you've got a conference going on between key leaders in Bethlehem, and Boaz is one of them. And they have noticed these people coming into their city, these 2 women in dire need, and they have said, what's going on here? This is not normal. And so they have asked questions, and they have found out the situation. And Boaz is saying, I got the whole story. You know what this means? This means that the leaders of Bethlehem are actively seeking out the problems in the lives of people in order to do something about it. And this means that when Boaz showed up in the field and went up to his manager and says, whose young woman is this? He already knew the answer to that question. So he's built a system where his manager is trained. Any young woman who comes in here, I need to know what her situation is, because Boaz, the boss, is going to ask. So I'm going to know her situation. I find out what it is. I observe and I report back. Boaz is doing this all over town. Friends, this is a level of leadership that would so help our society today. It would reach so deep into people's lives if we had this level of leadership. Any church that takes it upon itself to become a center of leadership like this, of seeking out cases of need and meeting those needs, strategizing to do that. Any church that takes upon itself that kind of spirit-led role in the community is unstoppable. So Boaz is doing this, and we know that because he tells Ruth, you want to know why you have favor and why I took notice of you? I'll tell you why. Because it has been fully told to me. And what exactly has been reported? I mean, when we hear the words, it has been reported to me about you, that's all often negative. We don't like that. And it might even smack of gossip, not care. And we might assume that the report is bad and that now I have to explain myself. But watch this. All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been hugad, fully reported to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. What was the content of that report? It went like this. Ruth left everything to care for Naomi, to be loyal to Naomi in her time of need. She gave up her language, her people. She left her gods, and she came here where she knows who a Moabite is in Israel. She came here, and why did she do that? To care for Naomi, and there's more. Verse 12, Yahweh repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel. What is he saying? He's saying you took an action, you took a series of sacrificial steps to love your mother-in-law and to be faithful to her. And we see this, and we recognize it, and we honor it. Can you imagine the impact of those words? The impact coming from the fact that a whole community of leaders, however large that was it 3 men in the community? Was it 6? Was it 12? Who knows? But they did that work, and they said, this is an honorable woman. Now, I want you to notice something about the way Boaz is talking to her. He is not saying, you're really good for a Moabite. I mean, I wasn't expecting, when I heard you were a Moabite, I thought this and that, but you weren't that way at all. I'm really surprised. Good for you. Oh, he doesn't even mention Moab. Moab doesn't exist in this statement. He does for his manager. That's the Moabite woman from Moab. That's what he said. And it exists for the author of this book because the author keeps emphasizing Ruth the Moabite. Keeps calling her that. To ratchet up the tension of this question. Boaz, Moab doesn't exist. If he doesn't say the word, remember Hebrew, very simple language. If he doesn't say the word, it isn't a factor. It's not there. So how is he coming to this conclusion? He's saying, according to Leviticus 19, you have your own character. You have things that you have done. And those things are honorable in the sight of God. And I know that because of his law. His law honors loyal love, fidelity, and this work, this insistence that you're going to be a producer here for your mother-in-law. The law of God honors you. Moab, completely out of the picture. The second thing you need to notice about this is this blessing. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by Yahweh, the God of Israel. And watch this. Under whose wings you have come to take refuge. It's this kind of motion here where the Lord is protecting the vulnerable, protecting the people of Israel, protecting the orphans, protecting the widows. And he's got his wings over them. And he says, you're like a little chick. You've scurried over here, and you have come under the wings of the God of Israel. What is he saying? You switched gods. You converted to the true and living God. And that God's law honors you and recognizes you. So, what is he saying here? The second thing that Boaz understands deeply about God's law is the nature of God's curses. They are real. They will happen. And you can be saved. You can come out from under those curses. Israel came out from under a curse of the firstborn in Egypt through a Passover sacrifice. That curse was real, and it happened. But Israel believed God and followed God, made the sacrifice, and came out from under that curse that hung over the whole land of Egypt. So Canaan was cursed. Jericho was cursed. It was first on God's list. This city is going to fall. And it's going to fall because I bring the walls down myself. No army's going to take this city. I've got a thing against Jericho. I'm going to tear it down. But one inhabitant of Jericho named Rahab said, that curse, it's real. It's going to happen. But I can be saved if I call on the name of the Lord and I take shelter with him. He will honor that because he honors repentance and faith. Maybe they wouldn't have put it in those words, but that's what Boaz is pulling on here, and that's why he's saying, yes, Deuteronomy 23 cursed Moab, and that curse stands. But there is salvation from the wrath of God. And he has honored that repentance and faith over and over and over again. Boaz understands this and says, may the Lord repay you for this conversion to his name and your fidelity to your mother-in-law. Amazing. And Ruth receives it this way. Verse 13, then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord. For you, watch this, have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. How did he comfort her? Well, he gave her a place in the field. He created a system where she'll be safe in that field. He said, come back tomorrow. He said, I know who you are, and I recognize the honorable love and friendship that you have shown to your mother-in-law, Ruth. And I honor that, and I see what you have done, and I see that you have converted to the God of Israel, even at the cost of your own heritage and your own family. You've done all of this. I honor you. Those are words of comfort. Those are words of blessing. That is speaking kindly to someone. But just challenge you. We've been talking about the fact that there are lots of people like Ruth in our society today. They're scurrying for shelter. They need shelter. They know there's a place to find it. They know the one who gives shelter is called Jesus. They have already experienced a great deal of the curse of this world that's fallen into sin. They've already experienced all of these things. And they're running to Jesus, but they still look and act like Moabites. Are you going to be the people who recognize what God has done in the life of someone who is just at the beginning of coming to Christ? If you are, then you can give comfort to those people and speak kindly to them. And that's the comfort of recognition. I see who you are. I see what you're doing, and I honor it. So that's the conversation here. But you say, wow, this sermon has gone on long enough, and there's still half a chapter left. What are you doing? So let me give you a pro tip about interpreting Old Testament stories. In an Old Testament story, you're going to see promises made, you're going to see commands given, and those are going to be expressed in words like in this conversation between Boaz and Ruth. And then the Old Testament is going to tell you word for word what happened later. And it's going to tell you all of this as a way of confirming the promise was kept. The command was obeyed. And how is it going to tell you this? By repeating everything that played out. And then you go back and you measure it against what was said, what was promised, what was commanded. And so you measure it that way, and you look at the outworking of the story, and it tells you whether, in this case, Boaz kept his word or not. So the pro tip is, if you want to understand the Old Testament stories, watch for this dynamic, a command, a promise, and then the outworking. Compare the words, compare the actions. The word for this kind of comparison that the Old Testament uses is called meditation. But you don't have to practice this. I'll just tell you what it means today. So here's what happens. Basically, Boaz goes far beyond what he promised. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread, dip your morsel in the wine." So now she's truly part of the crew. She's eating with the crew. That's his food, and he's giving it to her. She sat beside the reapers. He passed to her roasted grain, more food, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. That's how much food she was given at the mealtime. So he does that. When she rose to glean, again, verse 15, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves." So the gleaners were to come along after the harvest is done and pick up what is left. And he's saying, let her go out into the unharvested part and glean there. Let her glean in the unharvested part of the field as well. Do not reproach her. Don't wag your finger at her. Don't send her out. Don't give her bad looks. Go even further, verse 16, pull out some of the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean. Do it on purpose. Just send bundles of grain out there and leave that behind for her to glean on purpose. And do not reproach her, he repeats. What is he doing here? He's saying, take care of this person. Make this person's job really easy. So she gleaned in the field until evening. She beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. I don't know what that is either. It's about, I Googled this, it's about 5 dry gallons. And that's just one day's work. So she brings that home, and what Boaz has done comes back to Naomi. And all of the different ways he showed faithful care to Ruth. So she tells her mother-in-law where she was, what the man's name was. Now watch this. Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Oh, well, it was Boaz, verse 20. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by who? The Almighty? That's what she called him back in chapter 1, remember? The Almighty has done bitterly in my life. May he be blessed by Yahweh, covenant name of Israel. And then she adds this, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. What is she saying? I have a grievance against the Lord. The Lord knows it. I've said bitter things, but I'm watching the Lord give kindness to me through this kinsman redeemer. I want you to take you back here to a little phrase we didn't really talk about. Verse 3 of chapter 2, so Ruth set out and went out and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. It just sort of happened that way. By the sheerest coincidence, she came to that part of the field. Who did that? The Lord did that. See, we're watching Boaz from the outside alongside the women. We're also watching the Lord from the outside. There's a quality in this book that is laying out what the Lord is doing without spelling it out for us, without hitting us over the head with it. And this key thing, that somehow she just happened to end up in this particular field. Of all the fields she might have wandered into, she ended up in this one. Naomi sees it, and she says, the Lord did that. The Lord's kindness has not forgotten the living or the dead. That's grace to me. It's grace to Ruth, and it's grace to my husband's clan from the Lord. Naomi's starting to turn. She's starting to change because of this goodness. It's possible that you are maybe not like Ruth in this story. Maybe you're more like Naomi. Maybe more in the position of saying, the Lord has done bitterly with me, and I don't know what to do about it. And it could be that you're here in deep trauma because of things that have happened in your life. Can I just make this observation to you? You cannot heal emotions by focusing on emotions. We can only heal emotions by focusing on the Redeemer and watching him do his work. So when we're caring for each other, we want there to be an emotional change. We want there to be comfort and the feeling I'm being treated kindly. We want that turn. But where does that turn come from? It comes from each one of us seeing the Lord did that. The Lord provided that. The Lord was gracious and kind to me. That's what heals us emotionally. And so they are rejoicing over this. And the last verse of chapter 2 says, she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Yea, a whole year worth of food provided by the Lord. A whole year. Richly provided. Oh, but what about next year? What about the year after that? Is there only loneliness and solitude for these two women? Is this what the Lord is providing? Is this the end of it? Do we have to go through years and years and years of this? Or is there something else? Well, we're out of time today, so we'll have to talk about that next week in our family service, and we will see what the Lord does next. But I would just challenge you. The book of Ruth is showing us what evangelism looks like in a chaotic and dangerous society. It looks like God's people building systems to give care and to give protection and to give sustenance and to give comfort.